the whole thing about guiding 30 years ago. I didn't know a guide in New York State, maybe one or two on the Salmon River.
Adrian. He's about the only guy.
Adrian,
He's the only kind of guy back then.
Yeah, John, I'm trying to think, John, what was his name? But those guys were, all that came down from the Salmon River.
Sure.
But if you asked me to find a guide in the Catskills, I couldn't remember.
I think Adrian Lasorte is who we're talking about. I think he's like the second guy that was ever an official guide in the Catskills.
Yeah, there was
probably guys a little bit before him here and there, but like officially,
yeah,
what
there
I
was God, what was his name? John Dembeck. John Dembeck and Adrian started guiding down there. They were the first two that I knew of.
Yep.
And
after the dams were put in, and it was like a trout fishery.
Well, this was actually later than that. This was because they had boats that they weren't using in the summer.
Right.
That they were using on the Salmon River.
Sure.
So they start bringing the boats down. And you never, up until 92, 93, and you never saw boats down there. I can remember seeing a boat just freaking out. It's like,
what's this guy doing?
This is the end of it.
He's lost.
Yeah. But at that time too, I can remember being at the island there above the men's club and looking upstream to the Route 17 bridge and seeing a guy up under the bridge and going, they've discovered it, they've found it. It's like I would be upset if I could see another angler. And this is in June,
prime time.
Nobody fished it after the end of June.
Right.
You just wouldn't see anybody.
Well, it traditionally didn't fish after June until those tailwaters became them.
Oh,
you know what I
but
mean?
that's
years prior,
1960s.
Right.
I know that I first fished the East Branch. We went to the East Branch first, and I first fished the East Branch in 79 or 80. I think it was 79, and you would never see anybody. You just wouldn't see anybody. And if you saw anybody, you knew them. It was a few guys from Utica, or Art Lee, or a couple of other people that that knew the river. I knew Harry Darby and the Deddies. I won't say pretty well. I was a young guy, but they were always decent to me. And they said, "Oh, if you really want to catch fish, go over to the West Branch."
Right.
Well, I'd come down 81. And go over the high bridge there, and once in a while I'd see somebody fishing. I go, "What are they doing in that carp water?" I didn't know any better. And then in 82 or 83, Del Meza from Utica says, "Hey, you guys got to go over to the West Branch," and it was just unbelievable. It was just there was nobody there. There were so many fish. The hatches were incredible, and certainly, we weren't the only ones. There were other people doing it, but nobody talked about it.
Right.
And then, we got some articles that came out and people started filtering up there. But you could go down and you couldn't find a place to park on the Beaver Kill, and you'd have the Delaware system to yourself.
Now it's the other way around.
And now it's the other way around. I go over to the Beaver Kill to get away from people.
Right.
Which is, total reverse.
No, that's crazy. Well, folks, if you're listening, the legendary John Shaner is in the house today. I'm here with my co-host, Nate Dogg, Mr. Nate Dablock, and I am your host, Brooks Robinson. This is Cortland Hooked, the podcast. We're just chatting about the Delaware, the Upper Delaware, I should say, because the Delaware is a very long system and has nothing to do with the Delaware that flows right next to Philadelphia.
Well, it has everything to do with it because every drop of water that comes out of those reservoirs.
Where were you born and raised?
My family was originally from Western New York in Allegheny County, and when I was very, very young. I'll give you my whole family history.
That's fine.
We lived in Idaho and Montana, but before I was even in school, my dad had moved. My mom and dad had moved back east, and we eventually settled down in Skaneateles, which is just you could throw a stone from the studio here and it'll land in Skaneateles Lake. So I grew up on the shores of the lake and had wonderful fishing literally right in our front yard.
And you went to Skaneateles High School.
Went to Skaneateles High School. Yeah.
Who got you into fly fishing? Was your dad a big angler? Was it an uncle, a neighbor? Like, how does that start? It always starts with someone. You know what I mean?
I cannot remember not having an interest in fishing. My dad loved saltwater fishing. And my family has always had a connection to Florida, and actually the Jersey Shore. So we would go down there to both of those and fish saltwater. But my grandfather had done a little fly fishing. He passed away when I was very young, and my grandmother gave me his fly fishing stuff, and it just fascinated me. And the other part of the equation was I was a very avid reader from a really early age, and we lived down the lake. We lived outside of town. So my mom would go into town to go to the grocery store and so forth, going into town for supplies.
Sure.
And she would drop me at the library. And Skaneateles had a wonderful, wonderful library, public library, in a beautiful old building, and it's still there, beautiful old stone building. I just have incredibly fond memories of it. And they had a wonderful fishing section. So my love for reading and my interest in fishing, I go in there and I just discover these wonderful modern books and old books, and I also loved history, and I discovered there's a history to fly fishing. And so I'm just devouring this stuff, and then, going out in front of the house and, flopping around and so on. And then my dad bought me a fly tying kit. He didn't know any better, he bought me a fly tying kit, and he always said he wished he'd bought me a subscription to the Wall Street Journal instead. I might have,
you wouldn't be sitting here. Like, I'll tell you that much.
I'd be somewhere fishing. But I caught my first trout on a fly that I tied myself on Memorial Day 1966, and it was behind my grandma and grandpa's little farm on Bolivar Creek. Near Bolivar, New York, and I put the trout in a old milk pail, and ran it up, to show my dad. And my dad had my mom's 1957 Pontiac Chieftain, big black car, parked under the maple tree. And he was laying there listening to the Indianapolis 500. I mean, I remember this like it was yesterday, probably drinking an Iron City or a Genesee. And I was like, Dad, I caught my first trout, on a fly. And he was very proud, and we fried it up and ate it for breakfast. And I mean, that's what you did.
Oh, yeah.
This is 60 years ago, nearly 60 years ago.
What year do you graduate from Skaneateles High School?
75.
75. So you missed, you weren't a true hippie. You missed that era by a little bit.
I had hair all the way. I could tuck it in my belt.
So what did you do after high school? Did you go to college, or did you take acid and drive around with the rest of the hippies?
Well, I'll remain mute. I was in and out of college for a little while, and mostly I liked sports cars and fishing, and was trying to feed those addictions, and eventually went to school and got a degree in food sciences. My dad's business was food industry, and I thought that would kind of mesh with what he did, and went to work in the wineries in the Finger Lakes.
Yep. Which is a huge business now.
Huge. It was a huge business then. My God,
it's just boomed.
Enormous. Yeah. And didn't actually, it sounds wonderful. I really didn't like it. It was, kind of. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter and kind of dirty. And I mean, there was a good career path for me, but I really liked to fish. And then, two things happened. I really liked to fish, and I ended up getting married, and I moved back to the Syracuse area because my ex-wife had just gotten a promotion. I mean, I'm telling you my whole
no, it's fine.
And this was the early '80s, and things were not, the business, the jobs climate wasn't great.
Right.
And a friend of mine is going to open a fly shop. And my best fishing buddy is
How
gonna
old are
open a
you?
shop.
How old are you at this point?
I'm late 20s.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
What was like the first, like what got you into the industry? And it was a friend of yours starting a fly shop.
Friend of mine starts a fly shop. I'm going to work there part time. Next thing I know, it's years later. But so I had met. I mean, we didn't have all the social outlets, that we do now. I mean, the biggest thing, we all belonged to Trout Unlimited, and every month there was a meeting. That was like, wow, you just waited for that because you talked to other fishermen, and it was wonderful. And so it's how you networked. And I can remember, like, for a lot of people, just going to the Catskills was a really big deal, let alone Montana or something as exotic as a bonefish.
Well, I mean, people have to remember that are listening, there was no Instagram, Facebook, or cell phones back then. So this was like, that was it as far as communicating with other anglers, learning, different places they fish, where they go, all that stuff.
And even talking to someone long distance on the phone could cost you a fortune.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you didn't think about it. But
I remember my parents, it was like late 90s. That was when car phones were a thing.
Yeah.
The long distance call was cheaper on the car phone than it was in my house. My dad used to go out to the car and call his father and his family long distance on the car phone.
Yeah.
That's how bad that was. Keep going.
I can remember talking to my friend Mark Aaron, the famous rod builder, when we kind of first met in the early 80s. And Mark is notoriously long-winded. I mean, his stories they're wonderful, but they just go on for days. And I can remember both of us were pretty poor, and like getting these phone bills is like, it's like, my God, and my wife yelling at me, she's like, $30, who you're talking to for $30, and and back then $30 was a lot of money. We started networking. I remember going to the very first fly tackle dealer show.
Where was the fly shop?
The fly shop was on Erie Boulevard across from Lund's Ski Shop.
So was that Troutfitter?
That was Troutfitter.
That Wayne started.
That Wayne started.
So that's our home shop still. Nate and I live 3 minutes from Troutfitter right now. Yeah. Both of us do.
And you guys sold it to the Kramer brothers.
Rick and Dave own it now.
Dave, and their dad was one of our first customers and was in the shop all the time.
Who's still a hardcore angler.
Who's one of the most hardcore anglers I've ever met. Never met a more driven angler, and one of the very best I've ever met. I mean, the guy, I would not. We were fishing on the West Branch last year, and I was actually with Adrian, and Dick kind of drifted into walked into the pool, and we're like looking at each other and like going head to head on fish. It's like, oh, Dick's got one. Oh, Shaner's got one. It's like, and
I've still never met. He's always fishing.
Yeah.
Have you ever met Dave and Rick's dad?
He's like a ghost,
right?
I mean, the guy fishes every day.
Well, he fishes on the big river, gets away from people, so you don't really see him that much.
But he's very, very good angler.
So, Troutfitter, Syracuse. What's the next step in your industry career?
What happens is, because my family spent a lot of time in the Keys, I go on a couple of tentative bonefish trips, and I go to Belize and so forth. And Wayne had never even seen the ocean, and I said, "Look, you got to do this bonefish thing. I mean, this is like the best thing in the world. This is better than anything you've ever tried." So we did a trip down to Andros, where he's been going ever since, and we started running some destination trips. We'd started to go to Montana.
Out of the shop?
Out of the shop,
yep.
Yeah. We'd actually done some destination trips to Montana a few years before that.
Are you just a shop rat at this point? That you're working there every day?
I am working there every day. I'm tying flies. I'm doing casting clinics. I'm doing fly tying lessons. I'm doing fishing schools.
How big was fly fishing in the city of Syracuse at the time? Because right now, there's people that fly fish in this, like you and I do, but there's not a big trout, trout stream area. You know what I mean? I just
when I was younger, when I was a kid, and one of the ways I really got into fly fishing was we would ice fish on Otisco Lake. Scunny Atlas, you don't get ice fishing on Scunny Atlas because it seldom ever freezes, but Otisco Lake was a great place to ice fish, and the whole family would go over, and we'd take snowmobiles and everything. And one of my dad's friends said, "Oh, you got to have mousy grubs. I mean, that's what really gets the fish." And you get them at Vad's Sports Shop on North Salina Street. So my dad and I drive over. I'll never forget it. And it's got the bubbling bait tanks, and it's this old building, and on North Salina Street.
I think there's a strip club there now.
I
But
think
keep going.
very good, yeah. It's not the same.
No.
It's not the same North Salina Street that it used to be. And we go in, and we're getting our grubs, and there's like this room in the back, and there's a bunch of older guys back there smoking pipes, and we kind of wander back, and it's all fly fishing stuff. It's like Orvis and Leonard rods and Hardy reels and Vineyard fly tying materials from England and books. And it's like, wow.
And this is when you're like a small
I'm like
kid.
12, 13 years old, right? And this is all the stuff I've heard about. And my dad liked it because they're all smoking pipes, so he lights his pipe and starts talking with the guys, and boy, they know they've got a live one with this kid.
Right.
They got this is a future customer.
Who the hell's this?
And so they get me signed up for a fly tying lesson with a gentleman by the name of Clark Leachtenauer, who I didn't realize until the last few years how much influence he had on the trajectory of my fly fishing, and how much I really learned from him that I didn't know I'd learned. And I wished I'd known him better because, I just didn't keep in touch with him. But he's the one that got me interested in fishing in England, and so on and so forth. But there was actually a very, very active fly fishing community in Syracuse in the 60s and 70s and 80s. The Iroquois chapter of Trout Unlimited, which I was president, I think, twice over the years, many, many years ago, was very active, and they did what they called a trout forum, which was one of the largest fly fishing shows in the country at these times. And this is where I met Leon Chandler for the first time. And I'm like 12, 13, 14 years old, going to these. And I mean, the famous anglers and authors they'd have there: Ernie Schwiebert, Vince Marinero, Charlie Fox, Al Cucci, and Bob Nastasi, and the guys from that wrote Selective Trout. Those guys.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Those I'm meeting all these guys as a teenager, and and back then a book would come out and it would like be the book of the year.
Sure.
I mean, it would shake shake fly fishing, and so there was a very, very active community. But things, we would drive down to the Catskills, or we'd drive to Manchester to go to Orvis.
Yep.
Just to get stuff. I mean, you either mail ordered it or hopefully the local shop had
Sure.
it. And so that's kind of how Troutfitter got started.
So you're at Troutfitter, you're doing the hosted trips. What is like your next big step in the fly fishing industry? As a profession.
I meet some people in Montana that I meet the owners of Madison River Outfitters
During a
Yellowstone.
hosted trip or just on your own?
I would spend. I got to the point where I was spending, 3 months a year in Montana.
No shit.
3-4 months a year in Montana.
And you did the
doing
stuff
some
at the
guiding,
shop.
doing some fishing, doing some running.
Do you move from Syracuse right to Montana?
Well, this is so. I'm in. I'm in the in Madison River Outfitters one day, and it's towards the end of the season, and I'm talking to one of the owners, and we'd gotten to know each other a little bit by then, and he says, "How long you out for?" I said, "Not long enough." He says, "You want to be out here full time?" I said, "Hell yeah." He goes, "You want a job?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "When do I start?" And he says, "See you 1st of May next year." So all through the winter, I planned. I pulled up stakes and threw everything in my pickup truck and moved to West Yellowstone completely. I knew West Yellowstone a little bit.
Was Bob Jacquelin's shop there?
Bob Jacquelin's shop was there. Blue Ribbon was there. Bud Lilly's was there.
Yep.
It was probably the single best decision I ever made in my life to do that. I mean, it was just absolutely the right thing to do at the right time. And I really loved West Yellowstone. And I became the shop manager, and I was doing a lot of guiding, and met a lot of people, and started to really kind of learn. I'm a little older. I'm kind of a slow starter, so I'm in my 30s now. But started to learn a little bit about the industry. Learned how it worked from the inside.
Right. Who's who works for who.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And the shop had a great reputation, and one of the things that I really learned there was about product and how to buy it. And
from a shop perspective.
From a shop perspective, so I was really managing a lot of the buying. And
so you're dealing with the sales reps for all the different companies.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
And what happens next is I absolutely love what I'm doing. I love every minute of being in Montana, but the problem is working in a shop, and guys were very generous to me. I mean, by generous, I don't mean like crazy money. I mean, I understand what the industry pays.
Sure.
But they were very generous with me, and they really liked me, and I really liked them, and I loved the shop, and I loved being in West Yellowstone. But I get to a point, and I kind of I'll never forget. I wake up one morning. It's like March, the snow's up to the roof. There's not going to be any fishing for like 3 months. I'm in West Yellowstone.
Right.
There ain't nothing to do in West Yellowstone
right.
now. I kind of like that, but it was just like I kind of literally wake up one morning and kind of like assess my life, and it's like I don't want to leave here, but I can't do this forever. I'm getting older.
Sure.
And I started writing some letters, and I knew Tom Rosenbauer from Orvis. I'd known him forever because he's Rochester boy, and we used to fish together. And
was he at Orvis at this time?
He had been at Orvis for since
couldn't have been too much.
Oh, he'd been there for a while. I mean, this is 99.
Okay.
I mean, Tom had been there since, oh my gosh, late 70s
Gotcha.
maybe. Tom's a little bit older
Did
than
he
I am.
Was that like his first?
That was like one of his first jobs.
I gotcha.
mean, he was doing the Orvis News, the editor.
Yep.
And I mean, you talk about somebody, I believe he's the largest published author in the history of fly fishing.
I wouldn't doubt that.
And he's done a tremendous amount for the sport. I have a lot of good things to say about Tom. Wonderful guy. And so I dropped him a letter. I said, hey, Tom, if you ever hear of anything in the industry, just let me know. And it was like especially out here because I loved the West.
Right.
And I still do. But he calls me like the next day, like 2 days after he must have gotten the letter. He says, hey, we want to fly you out for an interview. We need a rep in New York State. So it's like
perfect.
Well, yeah, kind of. It's like so. I literally.
So you left 40 feet of snow for 20 feet.
I
of
left.
snow,
Yeah, I left. I left later that summer and came back. And Orvis, I have to say, Orvis was a wonderful experience. I was so out of my depth. I had no idea what was going on, and I'm learning a new language. I'm learning to use a computer. I'm learning to, spreadsheets and pivot tables and all kinds.
What year is this?
This is 99.
Okay.
Ended 99. And at that time, there's this whole shift in the industry towards, new media and things like this, and online sales were, starting to come in.
The internet.
The internet was a new thing. And I remember just how wonderful it was to have what was the Maps app that you? MapQuest
For sure.
So I'd print out these maps to like find these shops and things like that, and so I was working with them and really learning a lot and meeting a lot of people, meeting a lot of contacts.
You work for Orvis, you're going to meet a lot of people.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
And 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 so I was very happy there. I still have a great relationship with Orvis. And a few years later, I find myself here at Cortland. And I had, as I said, I'd always wanted to. I'd known Leon for a long time, and I'd always had a very, very good feeling about.
What were you
Cortland.
doing here? Visiting family at home, or
no? It was to be frank, Orvis had too many reps. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of rounds of layoffs, and I got caught up in one of them.
Gotcha.
And the best part of it is that Bill Reed, who was the sales manager at that time, his dad had been our Orvis rep when we had the trout fitter in Syracuse. So I knew, in fact, when I lived in Canandaigua working in the winery, Bill was running one of their stores in Bushnell's Basin. So I actually knew Bill from like 1982 or something, crazy time.
Because that was when Bill was at Orvis, or
No, Bill, this was
Bill's here.
Bill's younger than I am. Bill was running a satellite store for Buffalo Outfitters in Bushnell's Basin. And I'm driving up from Canandaigua, New York to go buy stuff from Bill. I mean, it's like funny how things turn out. So I'd gotten to know, I'd known Doug for many years, and I'd gotten to know Bill because he was managing Buffalo Outfitters, and they were one of my largest accounts. So we'd become friends. And Bill comes to Cortland Line a couple of years before, and he kind of wanted me to come work for him. So I basically found out that I no longer had a job with Orvis. And I bear Orvis no ill will. I'll say this right up front. I still have a great relationship with, I love the people at Orvis. They do a great job, and I'm still very good friends with everybody I knew. And that's the truth. I mean, I'm not just saying that. That's the truth. And so I barely, the shock is not worn off, and Bill is calling me and say, "Hey, you want an interview?" I mean, this is the same day. So I drove down the next day. I didn't even get a week off in between jobs.
He knew before you even told him?
His dad knew. His dad knew so fast. And Bill Bill calls me, want to come down. We need a rep. And so I went to work for Cortland. And I, again, a great company, my God, just one of the finest old companies. But unfortunately, Cortland had Hardy at the time. And being an Anglophile and just absolutely loving Hardy
We
tackle.
were a distributor for Hardy, correct?
Yeah, you were. And
so that you came up to speed with Hardy products, obviously.
I was selling, I believe Nate could probably.
Were you? You were in college, right? You were.
Yeah, I was here.
Nate was here.
Oh, you must have been right out of college, working for STH at the time?
Yeah,
Early 2000s?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, STA, yeah.
You were at Syracuse in what, 99, 2000? 2001.
Yeah, I graduated in 03.
03.
And then started in the office here right after that.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was here before that, starting in 96.
In high school, right?
Fixing reels. And actually, after we got hooked up with Hardy being the distributor, all of the repairs, the Hardy repairs, were sent here and being taught how to repair that stuff. And at that time, I was young. I was just starting out. I mean, I knew a little bit, but not knowing the whole aura with Hardy and everything else, and then having them come over here, these guys from England, and putting all these reels in front of us, and
they were a little fancier than STH reels at the time. Nate's probably the only reason why I don't fish a new modern fly reel, because all my Hardy reels just get fixed by him, and I move on with life.
You can fix a Hardy reel. So you throw everything else out.
You come up to speed with Hardy products. Were you a sales rep, right, for Cortland and
Hardy? I was
Hardy?
A sales rep for Cortland, yeah. And
Hardy, or no?
We had Hardy. That was in our bag.
I got you.
Yeah, so that was just another.
And Nate can correct me, but if I remember, I was selling more Hardy than the rest of the sales force combined.
I believe so.
In one territory, because I believed in it so much.
What was your territory?
I started out with Pennsylvania.
Best state in the world.
And it's a great state.
Somebody told me that there's more free-flowing river water in the state of Pennsylvania than any other state in the entire U.S.
At that time, the two biggest markets for fly fishing tackle, believe it or not, were California and Pennsylvania. I mean, the western states, and this is 20 years ago.
Sure.
The western states weren't even blips because there weren't 5,000 fly shops in Bozeman.
Correct.
At that time, and people didn't buy stuff out there. They bought it on the West Coast or the East Coast and took it to Montana or Wyoming or whatever. So it was. I had a huge account list, and with what's happened with fly shops, most of them are not there. But,
sure.
But I kind of got noticed, and then, like I say, I've always been a real Anglophile. I'd been to England a couple of times many years before, but had not fished. And then we had the English guys over for our sales meetings, and I pestered the hell out of him and, bothered him. And we kind of got to be friends. And then we had some changes, and I became kind of like the point man for Hardy. I was kind of like managing, a little
sales manager.
Yeah, I was got kind of not a real title or anything, but if there was a Hardy question, it came to me. And so they sent me over to Anik to train. And so I met more people over there. I met all the guys in the factory. And eventually Hardy made the decision to open their own distributor, Hardy-owned distributor.
Hardy North
America.
Yep.
In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I was their first hire.
Why in Lancaster?
Interesting. The managing director of Hardy at that time had been managing director for Black & Decker, which is in the Baltimore area.
Okay.
So he knew the area, and there were some advantages, a lot of advantages to putting it there, and that's where it ended up. And I actually turned out to I really liked Lancaster.
That's where I met you the first time. I was at the Lancaster Fly Show.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. It was the first fly show I'd ever done. I was working in fly line manufacturing, and I wasn't in sales or anything. I was literally mixing fly line PVC. That's how I started here. And Nate comes down, and he looks at me and looks at Joe Goodspeed, and he goes, "Do you guys want to do the Lancaster show this weekend?" And I'm like, in manufacturing, I'm like, "You mean I'm going to get paid to go work at a fly show for?" I'm like, yeah, I'm going down there.
Little did you know.
And little did I know. And it was my first fly show ever. That's where I met you and all the other Hardy guys. And there's one thing I was always jealous of doing trade shows, and it started at that one, is the Hardy guys knew how to eat lunch.
We know how to eat everything.
I was so hungry the first day I ever did. I'm like, "Joe, I'm going to get some food." And I walked by the Hardy booth, and you guys always had it. You guys have the nicest booth at trade shows, and even at the Lancaster show. And it's like you, Jim Murphy, Crosby, I think Walt Garrick was. I mean, the whole crew was there. There's pizza, wings, subs, and I go, "What the hell is this?"
Were you there?
I think Boone was there. Hugh was, like, the whole crew.
They
was
wouldn't
there.
have been there.
No, not yet.
Hugh would have been there.
I just remember the display of food, and I'm
What
like,
is this?
I go, "Who's this for?" They're like, "It's our lunch," and I'm like, "Oh my god." And I didn't really know. I'm like, these are the coolest. Like, look at this shit. Look at this display.
Were you there the year we had the restaurant trolley full of free ribs?
No. Listen, we're going to get to food in this conversation. All right. So you move and you.
So I move on to Hardy.
You move on to Hardy.
And it was just, now I really am traveling. I mean, they are sending me all over the country.
You're still working for Hardy?
I'm with Hardy, yeah.
Okay. Because you were retired for a little bit. Now are you?
I'm retired now, but no, this is we're back to 2008.
Okay.
So I'm working for Hardy. One of the first things Jim Murphy does is send me to California for a month. He goes, "Go to California for a month." I said, "What's my mission?" He goes, "Just go open up shops." So I fly to Sacramento with like a ton of tackle, rent an SUV, and I'd been in Northern California like a few years ago during a brief time I'd lived in Oregon, and so I'm just like, I don't know California at all, and here I am like driving around California, going shop to shop, trying to make appointments. I loved it. I had the best time. And I met so many people. A lot of them I'm still in touch with. In fact, we were in Los Angeles not too long ago, and I dropped in on Fisherman's Spot in Van Nuys, and it was like, oh my God, John! It's like, I mean, I met seriously, I won't drop names. I met movie stars. I met people in the movie industry. I met like everybody. It was so cool. California is such a cool place.
So you're moving to LA next.
So I mean, it's like what I said is like, if I had seen this when I was 30 years old, I could understand why people live in California, And being from upstate New York, no one can understand why anybody would go to California.
The first time I ever went to California was for the Pleasanton show.
Oh, what a great show.
We flew into San Francisco and drove to Pleasanton, which isn't that far.
Yeah.
But that was, I remember getting breakfast and like looking at the mountains and the weather, and it was February, and I go, yeah, I could see why people live here.
Yeah.
You really can.
And the other thing I found out was like, if people were just, everybody I met was so nice. I mean, they were just really nice to me. And so I made a lot of good relationships there. But I was also spending a lot of time, which was really great. I had not missed a year going to Montana for at least 2 weeks in all of those years because I had good friends in Montana. But now because of Hardy, we're doing all kinds of stuff out there. So, I'm spending 6, 8, 10 weeks a year in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, with, like hanging out in shops and fishing and doing programs.
Sure.
And it was just like, man, this is a dream job. I mean, this is just, it was like the best few years of my life.
What were the expense reports from Hardy looking like going back to England? Because I know what they were from the food that you guys ordered.
I can't get into I can't get into that, but we
well, you can, because remember the one Lancaster show, I gained like 45 pounds about 6 years ago, and Shaner walks up to me and goes, "You're eating good, man." He goes, "What's those expense reports looking like?" I was like, "Fuck you, John."
Well, it was part of business, and we were doing a ton of business out there. I mean, it was what they expected you to do.
Sure.
I mean, literally, I'd get a call. It's like, "Hey, John, it's so and so. I'm in such and such Idaho. Can you come out, for my event?" And it was like, I'd call, "Yeah, get out there."
Yep.
Oh, by the way, can a couple other of us, rest of us come? And so, consequently, I really, I got to fish. Like what a lot of people don't understand or realize is that, being a rep, if you're fishing all the time, you're not a very good rep.
Sure.
And there were a lot of areas in the country that I traveled to for work that I never got to fish in, because it's business. But on the other hand, you do get opportunities. And I know that when I had reps working under me and I couldn't get a hold of them, I knew they were fishing.
Yeah, you just go down to the creek and find them.
We'd have a little talk, but as long as the work's getting done, that's fine.
There is a fine line in being a sales rep, as I am a sales rep. Like,
Yeah.
I know when I travel through Pennsylvania, when I'm leaving a shop at 5:30 and I'm near Penns Creek or Spring Creek or Fishing Creek or whatever, I'm going fishing till it's
Well,
dark.
if you were a really good rep, you'd be too tired from working to go fishing.
Oh.
But I got to fish in areas I never thought I'd get to fish
Sure.
in. And I won't say that. I won't say I never thought I'd get to fish in them, but I used to love to go to northern Michigan. Used to love to go and fish the Au Sable and these on sales trips. So I'd usually tack on a few extra days and things like that. So it opened a lot of doors to me in that respect, and I was very, very fortunate to fish so many different places, and a lot of those places in a lot of cases now, just in the last 10 or 15 years, have changed a lot. And, it's not what it was. So I saw a lot of...
Because the fishery or because of
the
people?
fishery and the number of people.
Like
and,
the Upper Delaware.
Like the Upper Delaware, which is, that's a totally different conversation.
It is what it is. Yeah, I get it.
And, if you look at it and you look at it, it was funny, like when I would be in a on a river or whatever, or driving by a river, and I wasn't fishing, and I'd just say, "Look at all those people buying tackle out there." And it's completely different when you're on your way to the river to go fishing.
Yeah.
And
A little different mindset.
yeah, but you have to, I think anybody in the industry has to understand that you can't complain about it because you've been part of the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it behooves us to sell product and
Sure.
get people into the sport.
Right. And then complain about
And
them
then
being
complain,
in your way.
yeah, it's like, complain that, you're my
exactly.
way, right? You're
So
standing on my rock.
What are you retired now?
I retired 2 years ago this month.
Like you're retired.
I'm done. We bought the house down on the West Branch.
Does everyone know that? Like John Shaner's retired.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pretty. I mean,
I was hoping this was going to be like first news. Cortland Hook the
oh
podcast.
no. You would think
Because you're still working. Like I go to the New Jersey trade show this year, and they're like, "Oh, Shaner's retired." Well, there he is sitting in the Hardy booth repairing reels.
Yeah, well, some
You just
things
can't.
never
You
change.
just
I
can't
can't
get
stay away from
I know
it.
you
Yeah,
can't.
It's
and you have to keep working. You
and-
know, I mean, just it's not really a job at that point. You know what
it's
I mean?
yeah. That's when I'm not having to make numbers.
Yeah.
And
I
you
agree.
know, and I can walk away from it. It's a wonderful part of the trajectory of my life as a fly fisherman. I'm not by nature a really gregarious person. I don't like to be. I don't seek out crowds or other people. I'm very, very comfortable it's fishing by myself. And it's really funny because most of my fishing life, my idea of fishing is fishing alone. I really don't like to fish.
The first time I ever saw
of
you
people.
outside of a trade show, because I've only known Shaner from trade shows. Like we don't hang out. I don't see you. And I'm going down the Delaware last year, and I look at the end of this pool, and I'm like, I think that's Shaner.
There's nobody that looks like that.
I go, that's Shaner, and I'm with Tom Zarecki from Angler's Den, and he goes, I know Shaner. That's not Shaner. I go, that's John Shaner. Well, we get to the end of the pool, and I go, Shaner. He goes, hey, how's it going? He was standing on a rock, so he looked a little taller. And yes, you were fishing by yourself, of course. And we know the whole trick. Like if John sees somebody looking at him, he stops fishing. He doesn't want anyone to know how he's fishing. So
pretty true.
We had a good chat. So this is literally the second time I've ever seen you outside of a trade show. Once by yourself fishing in the middle of the river, and then today.
When I moved a couple of years ago, you know how you clean things out, and I had a drawer, and it was nothing but the little name badges from shows.
I have all of them.
I had a stack that had to be 8 inches high. I mean, there were literally hundreds of them.
What is your all-time favorite trade show?
Not
current, could be
single one I ever went to.
Yes.
Oh man.
Like that you look forward, like every year it was like, man, I can't wait to get there.
It's funny. It's funny, but I still love the Lancaster show.
Me
and
too.
That was directly because of us being in Lancaster.
It's a great venue too.
Chuck Furimsky was looking for another venue in that area. And he tried Washingtonville and at a casino or something, didn't work out. And we said, well, there's this great hotel right in Lancaster.
Unbelievable.
And everything's
That's our
there.
favorite. I mean,
that's a great
dude.
It is absolutely my favorite show. But I have to say, Pleasanton. I always enjoyed Pleasanton.
Really?
Oh man, I loved Pleasanton. The early years that I went to Pleasanton,
Was it always at that county fairground?
yeah,
Okay.
was at its peak. It was actually in 2 buildings, and it was enormous. Now it's, I think, number 3 or maybe even number 4. Denver's number 2, but it used to be number 2 after
Or Somerset.
Somerset.
Sure.
But in terms of looking forward to just, you know, what makes a show to me is not necessarily the size, it's the people you get and their degree of engagement.
Oh, yeah.
And the one thing about Pleasanton that was so wild was it's a West Coast show, so it's Pacific Rim. And those people travel a lot. So you'd meet people that, like, going to New Zealand was like going to Montana.
Right.
You know, it was just like, yeah, we go to New Zealand twice a year, you know, or we're in Argentina, or we're, the steelhead fishing, just the exotic nature of the fishing that these guys were doing. And very, very sophisticated anglers. You mentioned Pennsylvania earlier. With all the trout fishing it has, I think that's one of the wonderful things about Lancaster was how many like local guys that are really tuned in.
I was going to say that, like, the first year I did Lancaster, I got educated on trout fishing really well. Because it was like one of my first few years working at Cortland. I didn't know shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But going there years and years, and we've done the show together for years down there, just the quality of questions you get from Pennsylvania anglers. Like, Pennsylvania, I think, by far has the most amount of outdoorsmen. I'm talking rifle hunters, bow hunters, fly fishermen, conventional fishermen. But the fly fishermen in Pennsylvania are so dialed. I said it before and I'll say it again. If there is an apocalypse I'm moving to Pennsylvania because those boys down there, they'll be able to kill anything and catch anything and survive. This whole world will come to a crumble, but Pennsylvania boys will still be alive.
And the diversity of the, I mean, sophisticated American fly fishing is like born in Pennsylvania, with guys like Vince Marinero and Charlie Fox and everything else. I mean, things happen in the Catskills, but not to the degree that it did in Pennsylvania. I mean, those guys really, they really move the needle.
They have a diverse water in PA. You have the spring creeks, the limestone, the freestones, the big rivers, small rivers, brook trout streams. You know what I mean? It's just it's endless down there.
It's really a neat state, and when I was talk about my brief guiding career, the majority of anglers we would get would be from California, Colorado, believe it or not, Georgia. We get an awful lot of people from Georgia. Very seldom would we ever get clients from New York or Pennsylvania. If we did, I'd take them to like special places because I knew they were good anglers. They could do it.
They could hack it.
When I was a kid, I did a little bit of skiing, and here, right in this area, and then I went. A friend of mine was going to school in Denver, and I went out and skied with him, and I never skied again because it was just like so much better. I mean, it's like, so this is what skiing is like. It's not like rocks and ice and bare ground. And somebody had once said, not necessarily to me, but I overheard it, or if you can learn to ski in the East, you can ski anywhere. And it's the same with the fishing. You take a good Delaware or Catskills angler, and you take him to the West for the first time, and he's just gonna smack him.
I wrote, and Scott knows, we recently released a blog, I think this week, called Ultra Premium Dry Fly Tactics, that I wrote actually, and it was very thoroughly edited because I'm a shitty writer, which is something I'm gonna ask you. You're a good writer, are you not? Nate told me that you're a dynamite writer.
I don't write much, but
it's quality.
I kind of carve at it, to try to get it.
So, anyways, we're gonna make you write a blog for us. All right,
we'll touch on that later.
We're gonna figure. So,
so it's not just lunch.
There's a laundry list of shit we're going over here. This is just part of it, and I had a quote in there that someone, I don't think it was directed toward me like you said, but I overheard it, that said, if you can catch an adult trout on the Delaware on a dry fly, you can catch one anywhere in the world. And there is some truth to that. The PhD level of fish down there. Yeah. And when I would go out west and trout fish, I'm like, this is it. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying there aren't hard trout streams and very smart trout. Don't get me wrong.
The hardest trout stream I ever met was Ben Hart's Spring Creek on the Molesnik Ranch. But the fish would almost, I won't say they would take anything. It had nothing to do with fly pattern. It had to do with just that you're out on this windswept plain, and they could see it 2 miles away.
Right.
I really cut my teeth on tough fish, and I love tough fish, and I love sight fishing, and I love stalking individual fish, and that's what in terms of fishing, that's what I live for. Most of the rest of it, I've fished every way you can think of. I don't care whether it's tandem streamers or, weighted. I was a master with early forms of strike indicators. I won't say a master.
Are you serious? Somebody told me you only fished dry flies.
No, I don't only fish dry flies.
Are you sure?
I've done a lot of thinking about this and what really attracts me over the years.
Because when I first introduced myself, I told you, like, look at these fish I catch, like, how you getting them? I'm like, I'm nymphing, and you literally walked away from me. I thought, I was like, what?
There's.
And then I told him a story about how I caught these fish on dry flies, and he found this, like, it was like we were friends again, like, instantly.
If I could fish only one way, it would be, believe it or not, it would be sight fishing with nymphs.
Oh my God, this just ruined part of my whole next segment.
Great,
but that the true sight fishing upstream with like pheasant tail style nymphs, I think to me is like the epitome of the sport. It's it's dry fly fishing in 3 dimensions.
Yep.
And just everything is against you. Everything is against you. And I still, over many years of doing this, every fish I hook that way, it's still like, wow.
I remember,
it
was, I forget where I told you the story. It might have been at IFTD or a fly show, but I was coming home from a sales trip in North Jersey, and I got to Deposit, and it was like 6 o'clock. The river was ripping at like 1500. They were blowing the dam out, and the river was fogged in. It was late August. It was 95 degrees out. So it was bright sun, but the river was fogged in. You know how that works there.
Yeah.
The river was ripping, and the only place these fish were rising was in between the bank and the ripping water. There was about a 4-foot section of kind of this slack boiling water. And the only way you could get those fish is by going upstream at them, because if you came at an angle, your fly would slack up, your line would go too fast. And I hooked like 4 or 5 fish, and I thought I was onto something. And I was so proud of myself. I mean, bro, I was up to my nipples over my waist, going upstream at these fish that are very smart. And I was picking them off upstream, and I told Shaner this, and he goes, "Don't tell anyone what you're doing down there."
And you just did. You just told the whole fly fishing community worldwide.
And I was so proud of myself.
It's all a lie.
And
it's all a lie.
I think it was like 6 years ago, and that was the day Shaner's like, "Man, this kid isn't a dipshit. Like, he's kind of cool." So, but it was true though, and you're absolutely right about certain ways to target fish.
Fly fishing is at the end of the day, it's simply about enjoying yourself, and hopefully not at the expense of harming the fish.
Sure.
We fish the way we want to, and I say this, I say that, look, I've been through it all. I've had a very, very fortunate career as an angler for a country boy from upstate New York. And when I was younger, I would just glom onto any new technique there was. I don't care what it was. I wanted to know it. I remember when woolly buggers had been around, but I remember when they got popular in the early 80s. Oh man, you'd show a woolly bugger to these fish that had never seen one. It was just
lights out.
Oh, so it's like throwing grenades at them. But after a while, it becomes not just about catching fish.
Sure.
We don't get into a philosophical discussion here. It becomes how you do it.
Yep.
And it kind of goes back to what I said much earlier about, learning how easy catching fish can be. There's a lot of fishing is simply tricks. You can use those tricks for good or evil, if you will. It's like there's actually certain types of flies that I absolutely love fishing them, but I fish them very, very infrequently now because it's almost too easy in a lot of cases. I know that sounds, really smug or, like I'm full of myself.
Yeah. There's certain times and places where certain flies, it's like, am I really going to use that fly today?
It's like, why? It's like just going to make it easy.
And there's,
it's just gonna,
I forget.
It's not going to prove anything.
I don't know if it was a quote from some person, individual, but it's like your angling career, right? It's, I want to catch a fish. Then it's, I want to catch as many as I can. I want to catch the biggest one. And then it's, I want to do it my way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what's after that. Maybe death.
I'll tell you a great story. My usual fishing partner is a guy by the name of Galen Mercer, who's, you may have heard of, very, very fine artist and simply one of the best anglers I've ever met. And he's been very fortunate and just has fished everywhere and through the 80s and 90s when everything was at its peak. And I was telling him about when either of us fishes, he lives in Manchester, and when either of us fishes, we call the other and give him a full report because we often fish the same places.
Sure.
And I never forget a few years ago, and I'm talking about fishing up this one bank, and it's like, there was one by the buttonwood tree and blah, blah, blah. And, and then the rock that juts out past the spring that comes in and just giving him a blow by blow description of the session. And I said, well, I'm walking back down. I said, that big rock that's out in the pool? I said, well, there was a fish right in front of it. I got him on the first cast, and he says, oh, I never casted those fish. And I'm thinking, because you can't cast that far. And that's the wrong thing to think. And I said, oh, really? He says, yeah, they're too easy.
Didn't see that one coming.
And it's like, he's right. It's like, it's just like such a setup. He's absolutely right. But I still caught the fish, but and I was proud of myself. But he didn't mean it to be hurtful. It's just he was being honest, in his assessment of the situation.
You get to certain points in your angling career, and I didn't really start hardcore trout fishing until a few years before I started working here. But even in the last 15 years, like there's certain places I just don't go there anymore. You know what I mean? You want to challenge yourself, and we're lucky that we work in the industry where you get to meet and deal with so many unbelievable anglers that they might their career is fishing. Like we're in sales or manufacturing or whatever, but these tips and tricks that these guys have all around the country. And if you're a sponge and you retain them and you try them and you apply them to where you're fishing next, all of a sudden, like your arsenal is deep. You know what I mean? And then you try new things. You try to challenge yourself. Like I said, you try to catch fish your way, and eventually.
Well, I think that for myself, I think about this quite a bit and I discuss it with other friends, is that I think my fishing has come to a very comfortable place for me where I'm really, really, I know how much I don't know. I know how limited my abilities are. But I'm really happy with where I am in terms of fishing.
Sure.
I'm confident enough that I could fish with anyone, and not make a monkey out of myself. Right. And everybody has good days and bad days. Yeah. I don't care who it is. I've been smacked down by beginners and lots of times, but I won't say luck has, luck will, skill trumps luck every time. But I'm really to the point, and for the younger guys, or people getting started that are in those areas where it's it's about catching fish or about catching big fish. This might sound strange because it would have sounded strange to me when I was in those same stages. But I'll often go down to the river and catch one or two fish and just go home. I really can walk away from rising fish now.
It's also because your house is next to the river.
My house is next to the river. Jesus Christ. And I can go home and have a cold one and come back down in an hour. But
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, but I've really, just the other day, I'm seeing the first Hendricksons and there's a few fish rising and I throw my gear on and I go, I'm just going to get cold.
Right.
I just love to watch the fish rise. I love to know they're there. But that doesn't mean that I'm not still working on all my skills.
Right.
And that's not what I'm saying at all. The last thing I am is I am a details guy when it comes to my fishing, and so much of fishing success is about the little things, about the details. That's what really, to me, marks a really good angler. You can have a lot of abilities, but boy, if you're missing some of the details, you can be missing a lot of success. And having worked with the fly fishing public, you hear a lot of that. Well, I'm just out there because I like being in nature and all this kind of stuff. Baloney, no, you're out there because you really want to catch fish. And, one of the things that's
my excuse when I don't catch shit.
Yeah.
I just like being in nature.
I never say that. I say, what the hell have I done? What's wrong?
If you see a picture of a sunrise on my phone, it's because or sunset, I didn't catch shit.
I never blame conditions. I never blame this other stuff. I always blame myself. If you blame yourself for not catching fish, you'll get better. It's just, it gives you things to work on. I say work on, I work on leaders. I work on fly patterns. I work on, and this isn't just like this big shotgun approach where, I go from one extreme to the other. I tweak things constantly. And the other really, really, really good fishermen I know, I don't want to say the other, the really, really, really good fishermen I know do this as well. My fly box is different than it was 5 years ago. It's different than it was 10 years ago. It's certainly different than it was 20 years ago. And I wished I had the flies then that I have now. And maybe part of that is just confidence. But I've also whittled things down to just relatively few patterns. And we're going off on a tangent.
You're fine. Keep going.
Going off on a tangent. But I've been I'm as much a fly tyer as I am a fisherman, and I actually tie very few flies anymore because I just don't fill up boxes with random flies. I think one of the biggest mistakes an angler can make is to rely on fly pattern rather than technique and skill. So many, and I hear these conversations, and I'm sometimes drawn into these conversations, and you especially on the West Branch, if the such and such is on, you got to have just this. Well, okay, if that makes you feel good. If you have confidence in the fly, you're going to fish it better than something you have confidence in. But think about this. Every fly that's ever been made is slightly different than every other fly, that pattern, size, whatever. My quill Gordon is different than your quill Gordon. All the only things it may have, is the list of materials of the pattern. So when you think about that, and you think, that like, I've got to say, I've probably never seen a fly that I would say couldn't catch a fish. I see a lot of flies that are sold that I probably wouldn't give to somebody I didn't like to try to fish with, but that doesn't mean they won't catch a fish. And, trout are not very imaginative creatures. But if you can simplify the patterns that you carry and work with the ones that you have the most confidence in, then you can start spending your time casting better. Presentation is everything,
especially down there.
You
can have the best fly, but if you don't reach, cast, mend, have no drag,
if you don't understand how to put it in front of the fish so it doesn't drag. And in dry fly and near surface fishing, it's all about eliminating drag. That's all it is.
And down there, if you have drag on your first pass, you might put that fish down for 25 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people don't understand that might be listening. The river we're talking about, it's not that you didn't get an eat because you had drag. You might need to move on to the next fish. Or you're going to wait till the next night because he's not going to rise again.
I learned this long ago down there, and it sounds, it may not sound right, but if you watch me fishing, if somebody were to watch me fishing, they'll see that I don't make very many casts. Please don't take this as I don't cast until I'm ready to catch a fish. I don't waste that cast. I mean, when I was taught to shoot, my dad would only give me 3 shells. So I wasn't out there just, shooting randomly.
Right.
You picked your shot. And that's just as important. The ideal of an ethical, a hunter's ethics, whether it's with gun or bow, is a clean shot. One clean shot. And I was taught if you can't get a clean shot, you don't take the shot. It's for slightly different reasons. The same thing is true in fishing, where you're fishing, not randomly, not where you're just trying to pound fish up, but where you're fishing for an individual fish. Your first cast is the most important cast. And, you hear things like, well, I'm just trying to get the range, or I'm trying to do this or that. That's all baloney. I mean, your first cast, I always look at it this way. Your first cast, I count as 100 points. That's your best chance to take that fish. Second cast, now it's down to 50. Your third cast is 25. And everything after that, you're probably, if everything else is the same, the fish is, for me, the fish is done, or it has to be rested or whatever. But just to hammer these fish, if they don't eat your fly the first couple of casts, either you're doing something wrong or they really don't want that fly.
Right.
And chances are you're just doing something wrong. I'll never, I could tell you dozens of times that I've watched other fishermen working a fish and watch them leave in disgust. And again, please don't take this the wrong way, but going over and catching that fish on a first cast, just because of their position where they were, and I could, you can see across the river they're getting drag.
Yep.
I was watching a fisherman the other day. He makes a nice cast nice, looks like it's over the fish. First thing he does, he makes this huge bend. The fly skates like 4 feet. It's all over with. Game over. Game over. You need to put all that, you need to think about that. That slack needs to be in the cast and not something that you add to it. Every time you move the rod, Every time you move the fly, everything changes.
Makes total sense.
Yeah. I mean, there are times when you manipulate the fly into the fish, but you have to take that. I believe you have to take that into account first and calculate for that before you make the cast.
Yep.
Now, I mean, we're really going out on a limb here.
No, it's fine.
But this is, again, let's say that this is the type of fishing I like, which is, whether it's here on the West Branch or the Henry's Fork or, the chalk streams in England or, whatever it is, the type of fishing that I really pursue are visible fish or visible rises where I know what's going on. I can control what's going on. Random fishing doesn't hold a lot of interest to me. Just random casting. Now I'm gonna back up because, I don't want to put my foot too far down my throat, because the other thing that I'll have to say that I'm kind of known for is fishing wet flies, which is, you would think, is a total blind fishing game. And in a lot of ways it is, but you have to read the water and you have to know where the fish are going to be.
Based on the conditions.
Based on the
time of the year, the water flow, the temp. Yep.
All of those things. And where these traditional types of techniques actually grew from was fishing, in a lot of cases, to visible fish. It's just that it was the only way you could approach them. So fishing wet flies to fish that are rising or bulging becomes a very, very sophisticated game. And I have to say, because Brooks, you mentioned, me being a dry fly fisherman, I would rather be considered a near surface fisherman. Near surface techniques.
Sure.
is and when you read the literature, going back into the, even before the 19th century, you don't see a take by the fish referred to as a strike or a bite or anything like that. You see it referred to as a rise, which to me indicates a visual clue that the fish has taken the fly.
Yep.
And I can't tell you how many times that I've been showing someone how to fish, soft hackle spiders and things like that, and I'll say strike, and they'll lift they're just like, look at me like, how did you know that? And I said, well, I saw the fish flash out there. I saw the fish move. And that's really, part of really learning those techniques. I'm a very visual person. I'm a visual learner, and to me, visual fishing is the, it's why bonefish is such a great fish. It's what I love. It's why tarpon fishing, I wished I could afford to do it, would be so great. What little I've seen of it, and I just, almost any fish, I don't care what it was I was fishing for, I just love to see them eat the fly, or eat the bait or whatever it is. I think there's a much greater thrill with that. Now, that being said, I also love, bouncing bait on the reef for snappers. It's a good time, or catching flounders.
Every
hardcore
hardcore purist fly fisherman, there's a little bait inside of them. There's a little bait inside of every hardcore fly fisherman.
And I grew up learning to fish with bait.
We all did. I did too.
And I'll tell you, and I've met people that I've never used a worm, or, man, I was deadly with Niblets corn.
I've learned. I forget who I was talking to. It might have been on a podcast, or I forget where it was, but I've probably learned more about fly fishing, becoming a better fly fisherman, from conventional techniques.
Absolutely.
And those guys say the same thing. And it's just, if you're a well-versed angler, not just in fly fishing, but I'm talking just fishing. It could be freaking hand lining. You know what I mean? All of those things, factor in and just makes you a better angler as a whole. And sometimes it translates to making you a better fly fisherman. Yeah. So, no, that was all dynamite.
All fishing interests me. All fishing interests me.
Well, let's get to some other questions, because you really said it all right there. I mean, I have a laundry list of stuff, but you just checked off the box on half of them. Some of these items we've already gone over, but I have a segment. It's called Rapid Fire, and I came up with the segment when I interviewed Nate Dogg and Chris. I basically wanted to get our listeners to understand who they are, what they like. I mean, we went down to the most random stuff, to if you like Copenhagen or Skol, if you like whiskey or seltzers. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. You give me your best answer. I might ask you why. I might not. All right, here we go. It's called rapid fire. All right, you answered this before, but your favorite trade show of all time?
Lancaster.
Lancaster?
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Great
The
restaurants.
venue, the restaurants, the smart Pennsylvania trout fishermen that make
Amish market.
the Amish market, like being trout, trade shows, you get a lot of basic questions. And as a, presenter or a salesman for those, those are our future customers. So you can't sit there as someone that's been in the industry for 30, 40 years or, 25 or 10 or whatever, and just be like, oh, here we go. You have to answer those questions.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I was that person at some point in life. You know what I mean? But Lancaster, you don't have to do that because everyone's dialed.
Yeah.
And the food is phenomenal, especially if you stop by the Hardy booth.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you at some point to write a blog for us because Nate told me you were a good writer, and I know you have a lot of history in writing. I didn't know what the blog was going to be about. So my question was, would you rather write about fly fishing or the top 10 best restaurants you've ever been to in the United States?
Oh,
If we introduced a blog to the Cortland consumers,
can
that
we
was like,
expand that to? Can we expand that to Europe?
that's fine. It's Shaner's top 10 best restaurants. What is your all-time favorite restaurant that you go to during a fly fishing sales trip trade show that you look forward to the most? Like, I know, like, you can ask Shaner, and I've said this on Nate's podcast, if you want to know where to get a drink, you ask John Stacy. If you want to know where to get food, you ask John Shaner. Like at the Somerset Edison show, I'm like, hey, what's good around here? You're like, man, there's this French place that's like 15 minutes down the road. Or what about in State College? I got to stay. Well, there's this Korean place. I mean, it's just, the list is endless. So of all your sales travels, and the place could be closed, or you could look forward to going back there. What is your all-time favorite restaurant?
What's my mind going blank? The French place in what's the name of it?
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Starts with an L.
Oh my gosh, what's the name of it?
Sophie's
Sophie's Bistro. Sophie's Bistro. Oh, what a great restaurant!
First time I ever had escargot.
Oh, just what it's
$16 for a snail.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. It's just bait and garlic, and just. But
that's the one, huh?
Yeah. Well, there's a incredible sushi place in Pleasanton. I can't think of the name of that right now, but Denver, I never looked forward to eating in Denver, nor Marlboro area.
No.
Although every year for many years, we would drive all the way over to Salem to go to Doobie's for fried clams, the best in the world.
Did you ever go to the Italian place across the street from Marlboro?
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
I got lobster fettuccine Alfredo there once. It was like four lobsters on my plate. I'm like, it was like $10.
I get better Italian at home.
All right.
Italian's like my.
So number one is Sophie's, the French place.
Sophie's, yeah.
All
Sophie's
right.
Beast.
All right, moving on. Your favorite dry fly pattern of all time? Of all time.
He can't answer that.
Is it one that you tie?
No. I make absolutely no claims at having ever invented any fly. I would say, and I'll be very honest about this, we would call it a CDC caddis. It's actually Fratnick's F fly, and it's one of the very, very first CDC flies that came to any popularity. It's almost impossible to tie it wrong. It's basically just a couple of CDC feathers tied flat on a hook, with or without a body. It's caught me fish everywhere I've ever been.
No shit.
Where dry fly fish are rising. I don't know if it looks like a caddis. I don't know if it looks like an emerger. I don't know if it looks like a beetle. I don't know what it looks like. It just is. It's a deadly fly. It's just a very simple fly. And I think that we want complexity in flies.
Too much.
And one of the things that I have, the most elegant fly ever tied is the Sawyer pheasant tail. Tied the way Sawyer tied it.
With a bead hook? Or with a bead or no bead? Yeah.
The bead. Oh, my God. No, it's tied with it's a weighted fly. but it's tied with wire. It's only two materials. It's wire and pheasant tail.
No shit.
And it's all the technique, and it's like the only nymph I carry
So
anymore.
what was the name of the dry fly again?
The F fly.
The F fly.
You can look it up under F fly or CDC caddis or whatever. And everybody tries to put their own mark on things. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with stylistic changes. There's nothing wrong with your style, whether it's more, densely dressed or light dressed or length of wing or whatever, any of these other things. But, everybody, if it's good, perfection is not when you can get to the point where you can't add anything more. It's to where you can't take anything away.
Right.
And that's why flies like that are so effective.
I remember at a trade show someone walked up to you and they're like, look at this fly I created. I crush fish on the Delaware. And you go, you created that? He goes, yeah. You go, I fished that fly 30 effing years ago. And the guy's like, oh, okay. It was we're friends with him, so it was okay.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget. I was like, I'm never showing Shaner another fly again.
Well, it's I again, you'll excuse me here, but one of my great interests in and I collect books on the subject is development of fly patterns. Of development of flies and fly patterns, but not like salmon flies or it's development of dry flies and development of nymphs, believe it or not, and wet flies, and almost everything has been done. Almost everything.
Agree.
I mean, I can show you in 1932, I believe, Courtney Williams talks about brass bead head nymphs. 1932.
What's old is cool again. Yeah. And I feel like that, like you see the jeans my old lady wears. I'm like, people were wearing those in the 70s, honey. She's like, no, they're cool again.
Well,
now flies are
trout,
like that.
When you get into spiders, soft tackles, these patterns are unchanged. I mean, the patterns are the same as they were literally 200 years ago. You can go find a partridge in orange. You can find the pattern for that to 1817. Even before that, fly has not changed a bit.
Sure.
Trout haven't changed. What our way of looking at it has changed. It's like there's the old saying that every generation thinks it invents sex. It's like with fly fishermen. It's like every new generation of fly fishermen thinks they invent these flies or they invent fly fishing. And I have nothing against young anglers. I'm all for them, but it seems I shouldn't go down this, but it seems like young anglers now don't want to learn from the older guys.
Sure. And
when I was a kid, my God, there was nothing I liked better than being in a room full of old men telling me about fly fishing.
Yep.
Necessarily like old men, but it's not what I'm into. But I mean, I knew they had knowledge and experience I didn't have.
Skip the learning curve and talk to them.
And I think it's because of social media today.
You are 100% correct. The amount of, the social media, the YouTube and the stuff, and what a lot of people getting into fly fishing really need is, one, just to talk to you, and two, to talk to people like you that have been around the block and explain to them, what's new, what's old, what's been there before, why you're using it. You know what I mean? And I totally agree.
Well, you had this thirst for knowledge on this stuff, and you knew that you said your mother would drop you off at the library. It's like, well, it's all here. All I have to do is just sit down and read it.
I think a lot of people just want to skip the learning curve and go that route and just want to be the best angler they can, the quickest, fastest way possible, but not kind of have the foundation of, you know what I mean?
Especially since the pandemic and fly tying is one. Fly tying in terms of a lot of fly tyers becoming technically very good fly tyers just exploded. I mean, some of the stuff I'm seeing, I used to consider myself a pretty good technical fly tyer. I'm nothing compared to some of these guys now. But I look at the flies and I say, it has nothing, it is completely removed from fishing experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These like perfectly tied flies and everything. Well, there's nothing wrong with perfectly tied flies. And if you have the skills, you can do a lot of different things. But, the flies that people hand me, like somebody will hand me a fly and I'll go, I don't like this guy. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing because this fly looks like it's going to catch fish. I'd rather somebody showed me something that gets my mind working than just yet another perfectly tied quill Gordon.
Well, like you said, a couple wraps of CDC on the top of a hook. Sometimes
it's all you need.
F fly.
All
right. Let's
go
ahead.
Move
on. No, you're fine. Okay. Your favorite fly shop of all time?
Oh boy,
Could be closed, could be current.
I would have to say. Oh, and I've spent way too much of my life on both sides of the counter in fly shops, and way too much of my hard-earned money in them. I would have to say that probably I believe the greatest fly shop of all time was at least to my way of thinking, was Blue Ribbon in West Yellowstone in the 1980s. That was the place to be, man. You went there to see and be seen, and they had fly tying material like nobody ever had or has had since. The vibe in there was just it was just
the place to be.
It was the place to go. Craig Matthews and John Jarosek and Jackie Matthews and the guys working in there, they were just so tuned in. And they were the best guys. Man, they were just the best people. They had time for, I don't care if you didn't know what end of the rod to hold, or you'd been, just gotten back from, Tierra del Fuego. Those guys knew, they were just great, and they were kind to everybody I knew. Plus the stuff that they had in there was like you couldn't find anywhere else.
No shit.
Yeah, that was. I won't say it's gone downhill. It's just changed.
It just changed.
Like
everything.
all fly shops have changed. Yep. One of the things about I'm old enough to remember is that almost every fly shop was different than every other fly shop and had a completely different feel to it, which was really a reflection of the owners and managers' personalities and the fishery itself. Today, they're all selling the same thing.
Yep.
It doesn't mean they're not good people or good fly shop or good advice or whatever, but it's and I think part of it is because back then the tackle and material wasn't as widely as available, and in a lot of cases you sold what you believed in, and you sold what worked locally, and you sold what maybe even just had, where today it's like you sell what people come in expecting to see. And I think a lot of the salesmanship with fly shop staff is gone. The customer in a lot of cases is pre-sold. They don't want to go, past that. And I think on the other hand, a lot of customers don't listen to the fly shop staff because they think they know better than
They already watched YouTube.
they saw it on YouTube. Yep. Yep.
All right. You can only choose one for the rest of your life. Would you rather fish in Montana or anywhere in England?
Oh, I'd take England.
Really?
Oh yeah, I'm afraid I'd take England now. And it's not, being, I love history. I like England a lot. I like the pace of fishing in England.
Here's my next question. All-time favorite trout stream in England?
In England?
Like if you're going to England, you're like, I'm going here at least one day. Like
the Emont, Eamont, the Emont. And I've fished the chalk streams and all that kind of stuff, which are fabulous, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rivers. But the Emont is like everything a trout stream should be. It just is everything a trout stream
What's
should
your
be.
number one favorite trout stream or river in Montana?
Well, if you said Wyoming, it would be the Firehole. But you asked Montana, and I would say hands down it's Armstrong Spring Creek on the O'Hare and Depew
all
ranches.
private?
Yeah. That's why I first went to Montana, was to fish there.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Big Spring Creek, or is it a small one?
So it's a big one by American standards. Yeah. And I fished hundreds of days on those creeks, and just through the 80s and 90s especially. And I learned so much from fishing there. They were laboratories for me, especially with sight fishing. And I'm fortunate enough to have seen them at their. There were floods in 1996, and I don't believe 96 or 97. I think it was 97. I don't believe they've ever fully recovered. and they actually lost some mileage. And when I say mileage, I'm talking about a few hundred yards. But there would be entire seasons I would only fish like one pool, just to learn every inch of it. And when I would guide up there, and I did a fair number of trips up there over the years, being a wise ass, I'd always say, like, well, the first thing we're going to have to do is when we get up to the river, we're going to have to move some fish out of the way, get a place to stand. And this guy is a wise ass, isn't he? And they'd look into the water and they go, you're right. I mean, there were just fish everywhere, just wild 15 to 19 inch browns and rainbows just everywhere and rising all day long. And not that easy to catch.
Right.
Just fabulous.
Most Springs creeks are like that.
Yeah. Just
all right. You can only fish a beadhead nymph the rest of your life. Do you continue fishing or do you quit fly fishing?
I would, of course, would not quit. I would just, I'd just call it something else.
Jesus.
Really interesting thing about that. I mentioned Tom Rosenbauer earlier. In the late 80s, Tom gave me some beads. They were the first ones I'd ever seen. I believe they came from Austria. And they weren't counter drilled. They were just straight drilled beads, and you had to like bend the hook to get them on. And who was the guy? It had Trown River Products or something. I can't remember his name. Austrian guy, and I believe he'd given them to Tom. And so I threaded him on some hooks and threw some body material on there, and I took him out to the Missouri, and I just slaughtered fish with him. I mean, I will not say I'm the first one to fish them out there, because I'm not. But nobody I had shown them to had seen them. I had read about beadhead nymphs in some European books in the early 80s. And you'd see them. I had subscribed to English magazines for a long time, and these were just starting to pop up at that time. So I'd never seen these. But it always kind of struck me as like, what is the fish really interested in here? And then beadheads become part of the landscape. And I was fishing on the bighorn quite a bit back then, and we used a lot of shrimp, and we would just load the hooks with lead, and then beadheads come along. It's like, man, then tungsten beadheads come along, and all at once you can hear them hit the bottom, and you're really getting down there, and that combined with the suspensive type of indicator, an indicator that holds the fly up in the water, just becomes deadly on these tailwaters.
I can't believe I'm hearing this. Shaner fished beathead nymphs under indicators.
Under indicators, yeah.
My mind just exploded.
We used greased poly yarn, and we'd brush it up and cut it off, and we call it a Don King.
Jesus. All right. So you're gonna fish a beadhead nymph, but you're just gonna claim it's something.
I'm not gonna quit fishing.
All right.
It's just, but let me finish this one.
Go ahead.
On the beadheads.
Go ahead.
And I hope I did. I hope that wasn't it has to be edited out.
No, that's fine.
But
it's great.
I don't want to offend
I think he
anybody.
would appreciate that.
Yeah. But it was, he was very famous at the time.
Absolutely.
And, it all fit together. But I think one of the reasons that beadheads work, I've stood on many a bridge over a trout stream and watched the trout underneath. And, you catch a grasshopper and you throw it down, you watch a trout eat it, and all this kind of stuff. If you throw a little light-colored pebble at those fish, they'll move 3 or 4 feet to eat a pebble. So they see something bright and shiny coming down through the water column. And they investigate. And how do trout investigate? They don't have hands.
Right.
They open their mouth and they eat it. So now you've got this bright, shiny thing dropping down through the water column, or bouncing along through the water column. These fish are hardwired to grab that. And I always got a kick when beadheads started getting really popular, is all these endless variations of like, I remember an article, it was like 27 different versions of blue wing olive nymphs with beadheads, and everyone was the same. And some of the first beadheads I saw and saw people fish were simply a bead on a hook.
Yeah, I'm like trying not to go that direction in tying nymphs because I refuse to do it. But when I was fishing the Eagle River in Colorado, I don't know if you've ever fished there near Vail.
No.
I caught so many fish on this fly with a beadhead nymph that they shredded the material off of it. And there was only like a few things of thread holding, and the thread was coming off the hook. It looked like nothing. And I was so lazy. I'm like, I'm going to try it. Got one. And I'm like, are they eating the bead? Or are they eating like the brown thread coming? Like I was so, like, I think I was more aggravated that all the time I spent on tying nymphs, I just needed to put a goddamn bead and glue it on the hook. I'm not saying all trout are like that. I know you're not either, but there is some truth to that.
They're eating the bead, and which in this you may find this a little puzzling, but to me that goes along with my theory of reducing fly patterns to their ultimate simplicity. I mean, on the San Juan, they fish just a red hook.
Right.
Okay. That's pretty cool, actually. I think that's, it tells us a lot about trout, and it tells us a lot about the complexities that we build into this sport in order to make ourselves feel good, or in order to have excuses as to why we're not catching fish. So, to me, I could probably do exactly that. And it also goes in with my my idea of sight fishing nymphs. And it's arguable how much different is this than a Sawyer pheasant tail.
Sure.
So yeah, I certainly would not.
All right.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Who is your all-time favorite Cortland employee?
Oh, jeez. Dead or alive?
Either one.
Oh my gosh, you guys, you've backed me right into a corner. I worked with great people at Cortland. I have to say that I've been very fortunate to have, especially in retrospect to some of the people that I've worked with in this industry. It just, great people.
Before you answer, I will say that I asked Nate this question. He said it was you.
Well,
so keep going. But no pressure.
I was going to say.
I wouldn't expect to be the.
I was going to
favorite.
say. Nate's pretty favorite.
He's got to be top three.
Nate's pretty favorite, but
no, you said rep.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, Cortland rep.
Yeah.
Oh, John Stacy.
Well, that's what Rochford said.
John Stacy.
We both Shaner Stacy
terrible rep,
back to back.
Terrible rep.
It was Shaner Stacy. No. All right, who is it? All-time favorite Cortland employee?
Well, I mean, Leon Chandler's a legend. I mean, I knew Leon Chandler since I was a little kid, and it's unfortunate that he's not better known today. And this is only a few years down the road. I mean, he was Mr. Fly Fishing, and anybody in the industry that was in the industry a few years ago will tell you that he was the nicest guy in fly fishing.
Absolutely.
He simply was nobody had anything bad to say about him, and I can't say that about anybody else I've ever met in this industry, myself included. But I don't know. Nate's a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
Nate's you think about Nate. He's a lot smarter than you might think when you first meet him.
I share an office with him.
No, Nate's a good guy.
I will say that about Leon as well. Obviously, I did not know him, but doing trade shows a lot, I'll meet a lot of guys in the older generation that will, like, man, I remember on a camping trip with my family, Leon Chandler walked out of like the bushes in the dark and showed us how to fly fish. Like, I'm not joking. Like, there's stories like that I'm like, they're endless, and it's everywhere I go. Pleasanton, Lancaster, Atlanta, everyone that has been in the industry as just an angler has a story about Leon Chandler, and they're all good, and they're all incredible.
Yeah,
all of them.
I remember when I worked here, and I'd actually just started working here, and I was leaving one day, and Leon was here, and we're up in the reception area, and Leon, sits down, and he says, "Hey, I'm really glad you're working here, and this and that." And he tells me his life story. I mean, he just sits down and he just tells me the story of how he, and it was like, wow.
I think Leon knew that you were going to be the future encyclopedia of fly fishing, and you're like, this guy needs to know who I am.
And it was so not about fishing. It was like this incredible story. And I say that because I've been, again, I keep saying I'm very fortunate. I really am very fortunate. I've met a lot of my heroes, and with only a couple of exceptions have I not been even more impressed by them. And I always love to know, it's not like, hey, can you tell me some secret about fishing? It's like, I want to know about them.
Sure.
I want to know, and Leon just telling me about his early life and how exciting, his career was, through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And when you think of the 50s and 60s, I mean, these guys are struggling to keep fly fishing alive.
I mean, your stories are incredible, but the stuff that those guys they used to go to Japan and do synchronized casting and in front of thousands of people.
He brought fly fishing to Japan. He is a god in the fishing world in Japan. Do you know that?
No.
I mean, he brought fly fishing to
We're
Japan.
going to try to get, so his son, Kim, obviously they're local, but Kim is in Washington. He just retired, and they usually come back once a year. So I'm going to try to get him in your seat, and maybe, obviously, you're going to sit in on that one, but we'll go down that road with those, and we'll get everyone a good history on who Leon is, because he deserves it, and people need to know.
Yeah,
you know
they
I mean?
really do. And he was so... he was not out looking for fame. I mean, he just wasn't. He just created it for himself. He didn't mean to create it for himself. It just happened.
Sure.
Which is so different than a lot of other fly fishing luminaries. Fly fishing, people say to me, "Oh, Shaner, why don't you write a book? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" It's like, what new do I have to say? What do I have to say that's new? How am I going to make your fishing any better? There are so many people that get into this sport, and 2 years later they're experts and they're writing books, and they're, it's like, oh, you know so much about the West Branch. I don't know anything about the West Branch.
Sure.
I mean, every time I go down there, I learn something. And so it's very hard for me to be authoritative on anything, and I see, I'll never forget when I was in West Yellowstone, this guy comes in one day and he's asking for all kinds of information about fishing, and I said, boy, you got a lot of rivers on your list. He says, yeah, I'm writing a guidebook about fishing in Montana. And I go, and you've never been to these rivers? It's like, and a year later we're selling this book in the shop. It's just this is, in fly fishing, you're as famous as you want to make yourself.
Yeah, if you're into that,
if you're into
making
that,
yourself famous, I would 100% agree with that.
And the anglers that I know that I have the most respect for, both as anglers and as people, are the ones you've never heard of.
For sure.
It's
There's a lot of people I work with that the only reason I know them is from someone telling me, like, hey, this guy's the real deal, but you will never hear about him. Yeah. And those guys are always the smartest, most knowledgeable, and the most helpful for me, both as, product development, sales, the whole deal. So, well, that's all the questions I got. You've said it all, John, and I appreciate you coming in. I mean, you really have, but I wanted to give you this platform to just go down the laundry list of all the cool things that you've done. You've obviously done it all. You know that. I think we got to figure out what blog John's going to write for us. We're going to add you to the Cortland Pro staff.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
So there's absolutely nothing comes with that other than things that we need from you, by the way. And I think that's all we got. I appreciate you coming in, man. We love you. You're a great friend of us. I know you're a huge friend of Nate's. I know after I told you my dry fly story, I feel like we found a new friendship. So that's all I got. I know you're a busy man. Really appreciate it coming in.
Well, Cortland has always been it's the proximity and people at Cortland have always been decent to me, and one of the things through my career is I've found never burn any bridges in this industry or in the world of fly fishing. Being a little humble sometimes, goes a long way towards furthering your own career as an angler.
How long ago was it the first time you walked back in this door? What'd you say?
It was 15 years.
15
It'd be
years
15
ago.
years in July when I left to go to Hardy.
There you go.
And that was no. I was here for a meeting about E-log after that, but we won't talk about that day. But no, it's been 15 years, and it was about 20 years, just a little less than 20 years when I came in for the interview with Bill Reed.
You're right though. This industry, it's small. and if you're humble, things will come back. You never know when you're going to sell wine to a guy and he's going to hire you as a sales rep 15, 20 years later.
Be kind to your fellow anglers, and
there you go.
That's it took me a long time to learn that, but no, it's true, because I was thinking, we're actually talking about this with my significant other last night. We're just saying that we're talking about how fortunate we are, the friends we have, and the friends that she's met since she's known me, and subsequently has become very good friends with. They're all in the angling community. They're rod builders or fishermen or fly tyers or whatever, and it's such a wonderful group of people. It really is, and a lot of them, to be honest, some of them I didn't like when I first met them, and then I found out just what great people they are.
I honestly didn't like you when I first met you.
I know that.
And now we're boys.
I can feel those things.
I think I was just jealous of the food you guys had at Lancaster. All right.
Okay.
All right, John.
We'll end on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. Nate, thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate it as well.
Sure, Brooks.
Join us next time, folks. Always got a special guest in here, and if we don't, we're just going to let one rip in-house. So that's it for today, folks. Join us next time. Cortland Hook, the podcast.